What's up guys, and welcome back to another eBay miniature rescue. This week we're doing a little bit more testing with contrast paints, and I got my wife and two nephews to try them out for the very first time. The results are interesting. Just a few things before we start the video. My wife has painted one miniature in the past, and my nephews haven't painted any. So this is pretty much from a newbie perspective, that they've never really picked up a paintbrush before. And there are some interesting things that we'll get into near the end of the video, and I'm going to show you obviously all of the models that were painted, how long it took to paint them, and then I'm going to ask them some questions, kind of going a little bit more in depth on their thoughts about contrast paint. Also, at the end of this video, I'm also going to put up my wife's very first model. And honestly, it puts most people's first models to shame. And it's interesting to see the difference between that model that was painted probably 3 years ago with traditional paints that, GW sells. And it was a pretty limited color palette too. So stick around to the end to see her very first model. So I started by showing them the contrast paint tutorials that Games Workshop provides on their YouTube channel. Then I let them kind of go through the paints and play around with some of them on a palette just to get a feel for how they work. I also provided one model for each of them and a corresponding model that I painted in traditional paints as just a color guide to see how much they could match that color using any of the colors in the range. I just told them, here are all the pots, check each one of them, pick whichever one you think is proper, do testing on a palette, all of those things. And of course, if they had any questions, I was there to help for the entire thing. I gave them a little bit of coaching on how to brush and, how to stop pooling and kind of get things to where you want them to be. In case you're wondering, that water cup is strictly to clean out the brush when changing colors. It's not for thinning contrast paints. It was about a quarter way through that we had our first major incident. And you can see I'm kind of blocking the screen here. I'm trying to zoom in a little bit on my nephew because he opened a bottle and then kind of closed it again and tried to shake it. And of course, we've all had this happen. Complete paint spillage everywhere. Needless to say, my wife thought it was the funniest thing she'd ever seen. So after all that, they kept going and kept trying to just get paint on the models. Now, my younger nephew was going pretty quick, thinking that, okay, well, you're supposed to just get it on there and go and colors, right? And then he started to get a little bit bored, as a 7-year-old does, and decided he was done with his model. So this is his result. For the first model ever attempted, I wouldn't say that this is all that bad. A lot of learning goes on in your first model, and you're going to make a lot of mistakes, and you might get frustrated and quit, but with the stuff that you learn on your first model, your second model is already going to be better. I like that he used green for the arms and all of the skin, and the gold doesn't look too bad, or the yellow, I should say. I think with a little more control and a little more practice, this could have turned out better, but it was definitely a great try and not half bad. here is the second model. My older nephew just turned 13, so he's got a little more experience under his belt, as it were. And this one turned out a little bit better. It's got all the colors on it. He kind of started to create a narrative for this model in that, he brought in some red into the eyes because he was saying, he's got like bloody eyes and everything. And it's, that's kind of the point when we start, right? We make little stories about our models and what they're doing in the world that we create. And I think that's really valuable. And again, for a first model, this isn't the worst thing I've ever seen. Now, with more practice and patience, you're just going to get better and better. So don't give up when you start painting. Just keep going. And after about another 15 minutes, my wife had finished her model. Now, obviously, we're much older than our nephews. So there's going to be a lot more maturity in the way that we paint, a little more control, and figuring out how things work a little bit faster. And this turned out pretty good. Now obviously with real metallics, this would pretty much be a tabletop standard model. Obviously it's not the best because this is a first time outing with these contrast paints, but we're going to get into that a little more in just a minute. All right, so now that you're done painting, what do you think about these paints as far as you've never painted anything before? How easy were they to use, from the instructions you got from the video?
Well, they're pretty easy to paint with, but they're not too easy to open.
Okay.
That.
So the bottles were hard to open? And you spilled some?
Yeah. It happened to me, brown.
I mean, I watched the video and he made it seem like it was cake, and it was not cake. It was a mess. I mean, for me it was a mess. I think maybe with a more skilled hand, like somebody who's good at painting Warhammer.
So would you say this doesn't feel like necessarily like an introductory product, or?
No, because I mean, like with any of the figure, like just because I know like what the miniatures look like, there's like they're detailed. They're supposed to be. So it's like different things, like there's like spikes and or horns, or like they're the swords. Like you want to put like a brown and then a gray, and then their armor's some other color. Like you have to be pretty skilled at getting into those places. And like the way they described the layering effect was like, start with a lighter color and then do the darker colors, but it doesn't really work like that. I know the point is that they're supposed to like pool in certain areas so that it creates contrast naturally, that you don't have to paint. Mm-hmm. But it's kind of annoying that it does it in a way, because it's like it just starts like dripping into spots, and then you have to try to guide it with your paintbrush to where you want it to go. Mm-hmm. But I don't know, for me it was like there's certain areas where I was trying to guide it, and then I was painting some other area, and then it would start to pool in one spot, and then that starts to dry and I don't realize it, and then there's areas that's supposed to be lighter that are now darker than I thought they should be.
He made it seem like it was really easy, but it's not that easy. The paint kept soaking into little cracks and stuff. It took forever. It was really hard.
Just so everyone knows, this took about 30 minutes to do. Declan, on the right, you finished in about 15 minutes. Aiden in about 20, and Allie in the middle in 30.
Oh, it felt like it took hours.
I
don't know. The good points about it, like I did like, as I got used to the paint, I liked that I figured out how to train it to go to certain crevices and certain spots that I wanted it to, but it took me longer to figure that out. So like I think this would be good for, like, you should do a couple of practice miniatures and then
so even with the limited amount that you've already done, if you were to do another one right now, you would feel like you have improved just in your mind.
Yeah.
Like you could do it better.
For sure.
And that makes sense.
Yeah.
You know.
Well, I mean, I think they could be cool if you, like, if you're making a basic, like, kind of toolkit of stuff and you want to, like, paint quickly, then you could add some metallics in there and maybe some other solids, and then if you had, like, a blend of stuff, then they could be really cool. But, like, on their own, like, as they sold it, I don't know. I think it's just more like, okay, hurry up and paint your stuff so then you can play. And they look better than if you use just a solid color paint.
Right. So if you're not even into painting, like if you just wanted to play, then this would make more sense for that. Mm-hmm. That kind of a thing.
Yeah, like if you're not like into the hobby because you like the painting aspect, you just want to get out and play. Like, this is a cool way to, like, get the best of both worlds, where it looks like you spent more time than you did, and then you get to bring out your army and play.
Awesome. Well, thanks for painting.
You're welcome.
Sure.
All right, now go play video games. I know you don't want to be here. So there were two reasons that I wanted to make this video. The first being that I wanted to pull some of my family in and give them an opportunity to paint something for the first time. And in the end, it was fun for all of us. And even though, you know, the models didn't turn out maybe the way that they were expecting, or even I was expecting, to be honest, it was fun. And when it comes down to it, this hobby of ours is meant to bring us together so that we can have fun and play games. The second reason is that I just really was curious to see how well they would do with contrast paints according to how they were being sold. And maybe I'm being a little bit unfair to Games Workshop. I know that a lot of that marketing was a joke. Obviously, one thick coat is not a good way to do pretty much any kind of painting. But I feel like it looks easier than it actually is. And while you can get quick tabletop ready miniatures, I think that it still needs a lot of practice. You still need to have painted for a little while in order to be used to how paints actually work. So maybe this is a little bit of an unfair test. But in saying that, remember back to the beginning of the video when I said my wife had painted a model before. Well, here's her first ever model. Now, it's pretty hard to argue with the results. This was her first model that she had ever painted. And this was when I started back in the hobby and I was getting pretty excited about it. And I just bought this box of Khorne Berserkers and a few paints, you know. I think it was Khorne Red, Mephiston Red, some kind of gold, some kind of silver, and Nuln Oil. And I mean, it's not like I was even teaching her anything at the time. She just went for it. And I mean, come on. So, like I said, it's hard to argue results. But when it comes down to it, it doesn't really matter what paints you have when you're starting, even if you only have a handful. The whole idea is to get together with your friends and your family, paint, play games, have fun, most importantly. And don't be afraid to make mistakes. Just keep painting, learn as much as you can, and have as much fun as you can. I've been Casey for another eBay Miniature Rescues. If you liked anything about this video, please consider liking, sharing, and subscribing. Thank you again for joining me, and I will see you in the next video.